We begin with disappointment around the proposed disability benefit. The federal budget allocated $6.1 billion over 6 years toward the new benefit. That funding works out to a maximum of about $200 a person per month, and payments don't kick in until next July. Ottawa says the benefit will reach about 600,000 low-income Canadians with disabilities, but critics say it's not nearly enough, and is one reason why NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has not committed to supporting the Liberal budget.
The fact that the disability benefit is only $200 a month, far too low. So we've got to hear from the Prime Minister and the Liberals on what their response is to our concerns before we make a decision.
Kamal Khera is the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities, and she joins me now. Minister, thanks for taking the time today.
Good to be here, David.
In the 6 days since this has been announced, I haven't really seen anyone say this benefit is good enough. Even some of your own MPs, like Pam Demoff, said they were hoping to see more. Do you think this is good enough for people with disabilities?
David, I think it's first important to recognize that first time in Canadian history, we have a federally funded statutory benefit in Canada Disability Benefit that is going to support the needs of some of the lowest income persons with disabilities. As you mentioned, we're investing $6.1 billion into the Canada Disability Benefit, which truly is a milestone in getting this benefit out for Canadians with disabilities, thanks to their relentless advocacy certainly of the disability community. And this benefit, David, is meant to fill the gaps in the existing supports that the government has put forward, between the Canada Child Benefit, the Old Age Security Pension, to continue to create this social safety net around Canadians. And like all progressive programs that we're delivering, they are built to be enhanced and expanded. And it has been indicated in the budget that we aspire for it to grow like the key pillars of our social safety net. I certainly recognize that there is a lot more to do, and we're going to be working with provinces and territories to first ensure that this benefit is not clawed back and that this is an income supplement and not an income replacement. And second, to see what more we can do in partnership with the provinces and territories. This is an initial investment to such a crucial step that we're putting forward to get this benefit to Canadians with disabilities as soon as possible, because we know every dollar counts, especially now.
Okay, you said in there this program is designed to fill the gaps. But when this was announced, and this predates your term as minister, if I'm correct, this was described as a way to lift low-income Canadians with disabilities out of poverty. $200 a month is not going to lift them out of poverty, Minister.
David, I think it's also important to recognize, the context in terms of, if provinces didn't underfund the disability benefits in their jurisdiction, we wouldn't be in this situation. In fact, the federal government is stepping up to increase the financial security to fill those gaps. And they really do need to step up and ensure that, they don't have any clawbacks for this benefit and truly commit that this is going to be an income supplement and not a replacement. Look, I think we all, when we look at some of the hardships of persons with disabilities live across the country, I think it's fair to say that every dollar counts. And with this significant milestone, the benefit will bring $2,400 more per year in the pockets of persons with disabilities to pay for their essentials. While I certainly understand that disabilities communities call for more support, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is a first time in our history that the federal government is investing $6.1 billion into a first ever national disability benefit. This moment is crucial because it certainly lays the groundwork to get this benefit to Canadians. And we're going to be working with provinces and territories and, of course, working on regulations to lay the next steps to ensure that persons with disabilities are better off.
Minister, we spoke with people like Neil Hetherington from the Daily Bread Food Bank in Toronto. He was part of this coalition that was pushing for this at a high level in this budget. Their argument and their math suggests that most Canadians with disabilities need about $1,000 extra a month to get up to above the poverty line. And so while $200 a month is a step closer, they're still $800 short. And they feel like they're pretty disappointed with this. And you say you hope this can be enhanced and expanded, but there's nothing on that in the fiscal framework. What are we talking about here? And could in terms of timing and scale? And is it entirely dependent on the provinces agreeing to not reduce their benefits before the federal government does anything more?
Look, I think it's important, David, that you talked about, we are in this situation because the provinces and territories for far too long have constantly underfunded the most vulnerable members of our communities. In fact, as a federal government, we are stepping in because we're filling those gaps that exist. And I want to make sure that provinces and territories do not claw back these benefits back. And I hope that they commit to making sure they do that, because persons with disabilities, as we know, are some of the most vulnerable members of our community. We know working age persons with disabilities are twice as likely to live in poverty, less likely to earn income through employment compared to other working age Canadians, and that needs to be addressed. This is why we've been building on the next steps in strengthening that social security net that the government has put forward, with the Canada Child Benefit, with the old age security pension, and through our budget, we're making $6.1 billion of investment, the single largest line item in this budget, that is going to help over 600,000 persons with disabilities. Absolutely, there's more to do, and we're going to continue to work with provinces and territories to ensure that they step up also to ensure some of the most vulnerable in our communities are better off.
But that $6.1 billion is over 6 years. It doesn't start to roll out until next year. The people who are advocating on this file said you need about $10 billion a year in increased benefits to bring people out of poverty, as was promised by this government when it started this process. So I just wonder, how did you settle on this as the amount and the program design? Because there's been a resignation from the advisory council. Some people there said they were not consulted on this, and people in the advocating for this in the run-up to the budget felt pretty let down by where this landed. So how do you settle on $200 a month and the design this way?
Look, David, I think first, again, I think it's important to recognize that for the very first time in Canada, there will be a benefit that is designed specifically to meet the needs of persons with disabilities, particularly because provinces and territories have underfunded, benefits within their own jurisdictions. And like all progressive programs that we have delivered as a government to build that social safety net around Canadians, these are built to be enhanced and they're built to be expanded, as has been indicated in the budget. We aspire for it to grow as the key pillars of our social safety net, but we need to make sure that people that receive this benefit are better off. And this budget, what it does is actually unlocks the ability to proceed with the extensive and intense behind-the-scene work that is needed to deliver the benefit, including the next steps of developing those regulations, building on the internal infrastructure support systems, and to really ensure that provinces and territories do not claw back the benefit that's coming forward. I certainly recognize there's more to do, and we're going to continue to make sure we work with the community, that we work with provinces and territories to do just that.
So the group Disability Without Poverty estimates that about 1.6 million Canadians with disabilities are living below the poverty line, but the budget says that this benefit will reach only about 600,000 Canadians. Why is there a gap of $1 billion between what disability groups say needs this and your document that says will qualify?
Look, I think, as I mentioned, David, I think it's important to recognize that as a government, we have been there supporting Canadians, particularly those most vulnerable Canadians, since we got elected, by enhancing, introducing Canada Child Benefit, by enhancing old age security pension, by enhancing the guaranteed income supplement. And we know we need to do more to support some of the most vulnerable working age persons with disabilities who, to your point, are twice as likely to live in poverty and are less likely to earn income through employment compared to other working age Canadians, and that needs to be addressed. Because provinces and territories have chronically underfunded the disability community for far too long, as a federal government, we are stepping forward to strengthen and build on the Canada Social Security Net to provide that extra support to people that need it. $6.1 billion will impact over 600,000 people, as you know, to get that extra support, $2,400 tax-free per year. I think we can all underscore the fact that during these trying times, every dollar counts. We know there's more to do, and we're going to do just that.
Okay, I'm hoping you can explain where the other million fit into this, but I also wanted to raise the question that we've heard that this requires people to reapply and requalify and be reassessed to get the federal benefit. And some of the criticism is that a lot of the people who will qualify for this have already done that. They get on provincial programs, and that the way this is set up, at least in its initial form, will require them to go through doctor's appointments they've already done, and that may be unnecessary. I mean, why not harmonize this this with provincial qualifications, and if people hit the standard for safe programs in Ontario or Alberta, they would qualify for the federal program too and just be auto-enrolled.
Look, I think this is a landmark legislation, and we need to make sure we get it right. There are, different provincial and territorial mechanisms that exist. We're on track to deliver the first payments of CDB, as I mentioned, by July 2025. We're certainly working on drafting the regulations as we speak, which will be then submitted to the Gazette for Canadians to provide their feedback. I certainly will be working very closely with the disability community in the true spirit of nothing without us, working closely with the provincial and territorial partners to ensure that every single Canadian who is eligible is better off. And we'll have more to say when we roll out, when we talk about the regulations in the next steps.
Okay, I wonder, just as a last question, Minister, if I can circle back to that question of Disability Without Poverty says there's 1.6 million Canadians with disabilities living below the poverty line. Why does this only cover 600,000 people?
Look, David, I think as I mentioned, I think it's important to recognize that chronically, and we're in this situation because chronically provinces and territories have underfunded some of the most vulnerable in our communities, particularly persons with disabilities. And as a government, we're stepping up. For the first time ever, we have a statutory funded benefit in Canada, disability benefit, that is going to support 600,000 individuals, persons with disability, with an additional $2,400 per year tax-free. That is significant. And I think certainly recognize there's a lot more to do. And just like any progressive policies that our government has put forward, these are meant to be expanded and enhanced. We're going to be there. But I think it's also really important that provinces and territories commit that they're not going to claw back any of the benefits that we're putting forward, and to ensure that we all work together to ensure we support more, to support some of the most vulnerables in our community. And we're going to continue to do that.
Okay, I know I said that was the last question, but you keep coming back to this. You need the provinces to commit to this. Does this mean this cannot grow from the federal government until you get a commitment from provincial governments that every dollar is a net gain for the people who receive it, that there's no point in you taking over the entire provincial disability support programs if they pull back their funding? Am I understanding that correctly, that this can't grow from the federal government unless provinces give you an ironclad commitment they won't pull back if you increase what you're giving?
David, we from the very beginning have been there to support Canadians from day one. We're going to continue to be there. In fact, as I mentioned, we are actually filling those gaps that have been chronically underfunded by provinces and territories. We're putting forward $6.1 billion, the single largest, line item in this budget that is going to help over 600,000 individuals, persons with disabilities. And provinces and territories do need to step up. They do need to step in and ensure, first and foremost, that they do not claw back these benefits, that individuals with disabilities are getting more support, that this is an income supplement, not an income replacement. And obviously, we're going to be working together more to ensure that we continue to support some of the most vulnerable in our community, and because it's important. I think we built this social safety net. We're going to continue to make sure that that's supported. Minister
Kamal Khera, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, David.
Well, as we've been discussing, many Canadians with disabilities say that $200 a month is just not enough, and the details announced in the budget left many advocates disappointed, including my next guest. Michael Prince quit the minister's disability advisory group after the budget was tabled, saying he felt his voice wasn't being heard. And Michael Prince joins me now. Michael Prince, thank you for taking the time. You were listening in on most of that interview, I think. I wonder what your takeaway is from what the minister had to say in terms of explaining how she sees this program.
Thank you, David. Well, first of all, this is not actually the first statutory program of a federal government delivering income support to people with disabilities. We can go back to just after World War I with veterans benefits for disabled veterans. In the 1930s, the federal government started to provide income support to Canadians who were blind. And in the 1950s, we had the Disabled Persons Act that was enacted. So there is a long history of federal government leadership on providing income support to different groups of people with disabilities. The other thing the minister said about, the provinces need to step up. Well, again, just a quick little history. In 1996, a previous Liberal government terminated what was called the Canada Assistance Plan. David, you might remember this is a program where the federal government cost shared 50-50 with the provinces in funding provincial social assistance. And in most provinces, the single largest group on provincial social assistance are people with disabilities. So the Government of Canada actually stepped away from funding provincial welfare programs for disabled Canadians almost 30 years ago. So the idea that the provinces have been chronically underfunding, that might be the case, but the federal government is not totally innocent in that claim. And so I think it's a bit of a distraction to lay the blame all on the provinces. There has been a historic role by the Government of Canada for many, many decades for a variety of groups with disabilities. What groups were looking for with the new Canada Disability Benefit was a return by the federal government to a more meaningful, robust leadership role in providing income support to people clearly in deep poverty. So, as you said, this was greeted with tremendous widespread disappointment and dejection by disability groups last Tuesday.
So, and you're right, there were various programs. A lot of things got cut in the 1990s. I was in university, and I remember those costs trickling down to my tuition bill every single budget year. But look, on this, there is still a gap in the number of people, disability groups say need to qualify and who do qualify. The dollar amount is low, and it seems to me, from what the minister had to say there, that until they get a commitment that there isn't like federal money going in and provincial money coming out, they're probably not going to move. Is that how you read it? Is that how you understand the dynamic right now on this?
Well, I think part of the frustration is that the federal government and the provincial governments have been meeting and discussing the broad parameters of a Canada Disability Benefit for over a year or a year or longer, whether it's at the ministerial level or at the level of deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers across provincial governments and the federal government. So there's working groups that have been working on this, David. So again, the message we're getting last Tuesday is that this is kind of a fresh start and just beginning now. Well, again, part of the frustration and profound disappointment by Canadians with disabilities and their organizations that represent them is that this has been discussed since the throne speech of September 2020.
Right.
This was a commitment made then, and it's like here we are now in April 2024, and we get an announcement with very few details and with some, oblique blame onto the provinces and a very vague aspiration that more can be done and better days are ahead, but with no sense of a plan or any kind of timelines as to how that would happen. And as you say, $200 a month. The reason for that, and I think the low number of 600,000, which would be a maximum number under, I think, current projections, is that relying on the disability tax credit, which again has real limitations, really provides benefits through the tax system to people with reportable income for taxation purposes. So again, for low-income Canadians with disabilities, this leaves out hundreds of thousands of adults with disabilities across the country. So that's kind of, they've chosen an instrument, the DTC, the disability tax credit, that by itself has this ceiling. So it's really leaving at least 50% of those clearly in poverty out. So this is a very kind of disturbing segmentation and picking of the most, not necessarily the poorest, because some of those who are poor were not going to be eligible at all under the DTC. So this isn't like doing the most needy, David. This will be those who can actually qualify under a rather stringent eligibility criteria and medical documentation to get eligibility. So, and this was what was done during COVID in 2020. The government quickly responded using the DTC to deliver a one-time $600 payment to several hundred thousand Canadians with disabilities. You would have thought 4 years later, 4.5 years later, we'd be somewhere where the officials within the federal government would have been working on better delivery mechanisms and designs, or at a minimum, coordinating the DTC with the Canada Pension Plan Disability Program, Veterans Disability Program, and the post-secondary Permanent Students with Disabilities Program. There's an array of other program ways that this could have been flowed out to a wider network and population of Canadians with disabilities.
So are you suggesting it's exclusionary by design, by running it through the DTC, that it's about limiting, is it people who need a certain amount of employment income, taxable income to qualify for the DTC? Like
taxable income.
Right, okay, so if it's people who are, say, maybe entirely on social assistance, for example, or relying on benefits to survive, they wouldn't even qualify for the $200 a month because they don't hit the DTC criteria.
Yep. And I'm not saying this is the intention of the government, but this is certainly the effect of choosing to rely again on the DTC 4 or 5 years after pretty well every national and local provincial disability group in this country said, please, in designing the DTC, do not rely on the Canada Disability Benefit, do not rely on the disability tax credit as the vehicle. If you are going to think about using it, please use it in conjunction with 2 or 3 other federal eligibility benefit programs with complementary delivery systems. So we expand the reach beyond what the DTC is limited to do. It's a limited program, very targeted and very modest. And so that's part of the reason why we've ended up where we are with this just very disappointing announcement last week.
So just as a final point, Michael Prince, clearly, you say you weren't consulted. Had you been consulted, this is clearly not what you would have recommended. You would have recommended what you laid out there, a bunch of intersecting eligibility criteria based on the other program, because it seems like this falls short of what the rhetorical promise was of lifting people out of poverty.
Yeah, and as I think you said in one of your questions to the minister, why not automatic enrollment? If people already qualify through provincial disability programs, why couldn't that be an automatic? And again, there's been a year and a half of conversations and discussions, David, around these mechanics between the 2 orders of government. This could have been worked out. And I would hope that, again, that would have really reached out to that 1.2 or 1.6 million Canadians living, many in very deep poverty. And again, not just point fingers at particularly smaller provinces with very limited fiscal capacity to say, well, they should be doing more. Well, the government of Canada has much more fiscal firepower than several provinces and certainly the 3 territorial governments. So pointing fingers at them really doesn't help. And it's incredibly insulting and discouraging to Canadians with disabilities.
Michael Prince, I want to thank you for your time and your insight on this. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, David. My pleasure.
Thank you, sir.